Random House Audio presents The Columbus Affair by Steve Barry, abridged by David Rosaller, read for you by Scott Brick. Jamaica, 1504 CE, Prologue. Christopher Columbus realized that the decisive moment was approaching. His party had trudged south through the lush forest of this tropical land for the past 3 days, steadily gaining altitude. Of all the islands he'd discovered since that first landfall in October 1492, this was the fairest his eyes had seen. A narrow plain rimmed its rocky coast. Mountains formed a misted spine, rising gradually from the west and culminating here in the east at the tortuous chain of peaks now surrounding him. The natives who lived here called the place Jamaica, which he'd learned meant Isle of Springs, apt, for water abounded everywhere. Since Castilians substituted a J for X, he'd come to call it Jamaica. "Admiral." He stopped and turned to face one of his men. "It is not far," de Torres said to him, pointing ahead. "Down the ridge to the flat point, then beyond a clearing." Luis had sailed with him on all 3 previous voyages, including the one in 1492 when they'd first stepped ashore. They understood and trusted each other. He could not say the same for the 6 natives who carted the crates. They were heathens. He pointed at 2 who toted one of the smaller containers and motioned with his hands for them to be careful. He was surprised that after 2 years the wood was still intact. No worms had bored through, as they had last year with his ship's hull. 1 year he'd spent marooned on this island. But his captivity was now over. "You chose well," he said to de Torres in Spanish. None of the natives could speak the language. 3 more Spaniards accompanied him and Torres, each specially chosen. The locals had been conscripted, bribed with the promise of more hawk's bells, trinkets, the sound of which seemed to fascinate them, if they would but haul 3 crates into the mountains. They'd begun at dawn in a wooded glade adjacent to the north shore, a nearby river pouring sparkling cold water down smooth ledges, forming pool after pool, finally making one last silvery plunge to the sea. The first voyage in 1492 had been carried out under his personal leadership, against the advice of so-called learned people. 87 men had ventured into the unknown on the strength of his dream. He'd struggled for decades to obtain the funding, first from the Portuguese, then from the Spanish. The capitulations of Santa Fe, signed between him and the Spanish crown, had promised him noble status, 10% of all riches, and control of the seas he discovered. An excellent bargain on paper. But Ferdinand and Isabella had not kept their end. Whores. Liars. All of them. "There," de Torres called out. He stopped his descent and glanced through the trees. He spotted a clear pool, flat as glass, the roar of more active water leading in and out. He halted the caravan's advance at the pool. De Torres approached and whispered, "It is here, the place." He knew that this would be his last time in his new world. He was 51 years old and had managed to accumulate an impressive array of enemies. They'd succeeded in negating all of the rights he once possessed from the capitulations. He'd managed to retain his noble status and title of admiral, but they meant nothing. He motioned for the crates to be lowered. His 3 men helped, as each was heavy. "We are here," he called out in Spanish. His men knew what to do. Swords were drawn and the natives were quickly cut to pieces. Their killing meant nothing to him. They were unworthy to breathe the same air as Europeans. Small, copper-brown, naked as the day they were born, they possessed no written language and no fervent beliefs. They were led by a man called a cacique, whom he'd made friends with during his marooned year. It was the cacique who'd granted him 6 men yesterday when he'd dropped anchor for the final time along the north shore. A simple trek to the mountains, he'd told the chieftain. A few days' time. When he'd first visited the island in 1494, stopping for a day to caulk leaks in his ship and to replenish the water supply, his men had noticed fine bits of gold in the clear streams. On questioning the cacique, he'd learned of a place where the golden grains were larger, some the size of beans. At the place where he now stood. But unlike the deceitful Spanish monarchy, gold did not interest him. His purpose rose higher. His gaze locked on de Torres, and his old friend knew what was next. Sword in hand, de Torres pointed the blade at one of the 3 Spaniards, this man short and stumpy with a grisly face. "To your knees," de Torres ordered as he relieved the man of his weapon. 2 other crewmen raised their swords in support. The prisoner knelt. Columbus faced him. "Did you think me so stupid?" "Admiral?" He raised a hand for silence. "You are a spy," Columbus said, "sent here to report back on what I do." The sight of this fool disgusted him. The man represented all of the treachery and misery he'd been forced to endure at the hands of Spanish liars. "Ask the question that your benefactors want to know," Columbus demanded. The man stayed silent. "Ask it, I say." His voice rose. "I command you." "Who are you to command anything?" the spy said. "You are not a man of Christ." He absorbed the insult with the patience that a hard life had provided, but he saw that his compatriots were not as forgiving. He pointed to them. "These men are not of Christ either." The prisoner spit on the ground. "The Holy Mother Church will see your eternal damnation in the fires of hell." Then he realized. This agent was from the Inquisition. The greatest enemy of all. De Torres had already told him that he would not risk being discovered by any Spanish examiners. He would not be returning to Europe. He intended on settling in Cuba, a much larger island to the north. The other 2 men holding swords, younger, more eager, had likewise made their decisions to stay. He should too, but his place was not here, though he wished things could be different. He glared down. "The English and Dutch call me Columbus. The French, Colomb. The Portuguese, Colom. Spaniards know me as Colon. But none of those is my birth name. Unfortunately, you will never know my true name, and you will not be making a report to your benefactors waiting in Spain." He motioned, and de Torres plunged his sword into the man's chest. The blade was yanked free with a sickening sound, and the body hinged forward at the knees, slamming face first to the ground. He spit on the corpse, as did the others. He hoped that would be the last man he would see die. He was tired of killing. Since he would shortly return to his ship and leave this land forever, there would be no repercussions from the cacique for the 6 deaths. Others would pay that price, but that was not his concern. They were all enemies, and he wished them nothing but pain. He turned and finally studied where he stood, catching every detail that had been described. "You see, Admiral," de Torres said, "it is as if God himself directed us here." His old friend was right. It did seem that way. "Be as courageous as a leopard, as light as an eagle, as fast as a deer, and as strong as a lion, to do the will of your Father in heaven." Wise words. "Come," he said to the others, "let us pray that the secret of this day will long stay hidden." The Present. Chapter 1. Tom Sagan gripped the gun. He'd thought about this moment for the past year, debating the pros and cons, finally deciding that one pro outweighed all cons. He simply did not want to live any longer. He'd once been an investigative reporter for the Los Angeles Times, knocking down a solid six-figure salary, his marquee byline generating one front page above the fold story after another. He'd...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?